tonight. We've heard a lot already about the problems with our current trading system. What I'd like to do is spend a few minutes talking about one of the solutions. Americans are facing a historic opportunity right now when it comes to trade and the future of this country's economy. The next 3 weeks are a crucially important time, and just as important are going to be the weeks and the months that follow as we inaugurate a new president, a new Congress, and we let them know what we expect of them. I truly believe that today marks the best opportunity we've had in at least 15 years to come together as a nation and make new decisions regarding international trade. You know, when I wrote my talking points, I was feeling very hopeful. I'm going to talk to you about some of the reasons why I am hopeful that change is possible. That was before the news this morning. I'm a freight miner, and I'm feeling some of that righteous anger that Tom talked about. But change is possible. And we need to channel our energy and our feelings on these issues into making sure that we get change. Let me talk about a couple of the reasons why I think change is possible right now. First off, public opinion and public anger regarding trade and the economy is to the point where it's impossible for most politicians to ignore. In the last election, 2006, 37 newly elected members of Congress were elected on what I would call a fair trade platform. They ran ads criticizing incumbents for their votes on NAFTA, for not doing enough to protect local jobs when being moved overseas. And since these newly elected members of Congress have been in Washington, the vast majority of them have held true to their campaign promises. They've stood up not only to the Bush administration on bad trade proposals, but the leaders within the Democratic Party who still haven't quite given up on the failed NAFTA policy of the past. And so, while it would be wrong to say that we now have a fair trade majority in Congress, the balance within Congress is clearly shifting in our direction. And I believe that come January, it's going to move even further in our direction. The second reason to be hopeful is that fast track has expired. I think many people know this, but fast track was the Nixon-era policy-making procedure that rushed free trade agreements through Congress without ordinary committee review, amendment, debate procedures. It made it impossible for Congress to fix even the most obvious problems with free trade agreements, and it resulted in the worst trade policies of our lifetimes. Fast track gave us NAFTA after the WTO, and well, fast track expired last summer. It's dead. Now, it's true that the Bush administration stuck a few trade deals in before the deadline, and those could potentially be voted on under the old rules. But after that, that's it. Whoever's elected the next president is going to find it impossible to negotiate and pass a new NAFTA-style trade deal without these fast-track powers. That opens very big doors for us. And the third reason that I'm hopeful is something that Reverend Laura mentioned, and that's that developing countries are saying no to these free trade deals. They're saying no to the NAFTA model. The free trade area of the Americas is defeated. The WTO negotiations have collapsed. Countries are rejecting loans from the IMF like never before. And there's a lot of hope in the world that new trading relationships are possible. So you add all this up, and to me, it seems clear that we're going to see some kind of change regarding this country's trade policy come 2009. The question is, what kind of change are we going to get? Are we going to get cosmetic change? More lipstick on the pig? Or are we going to come together as citizens and residents of this country to demand something more? And so, one new tool to ensure that we get comprehensive change on trade is a piece of legislation called the Trade Reform, Accountability, Development, and Employment Act, or the TRADE Act for short. It was introduced in June with about 50 co-sponsors in the support of labor, environmental, and family farm organizations throughout this country. In just a few months, the list of co-sponsors has almost doubled. And the TRADE Act moves us from playing defense on bad trade deal after bad trade deal to promoting a positive vision for trade, but doing three very common sense things. First of all, it sets mandatory criteria for what must be and what can never be in any future trade agreement. Second, it sets out a process for reviewing and renegotiating our existing trade deals. And third, it states Congress's intent that fast track is dead for good. And so, we don't have enough time to go over everything Trade Act does in a lot of detail here tonight, but I will give you the quickie version. First of all, the Trade Act protects American workers and small businesses from having to compete directly with sweatshops overseas. One of the ways it does this is by establishing what I consider to be the first ever real enforcement mechanism for internationally recognized labor standards and environmental treaties. Erica mentioned the fact that our environmental treaties, our labor standards, our human rights standards right now depend on the goodness of the countries that sign them. This would put real enforcement mechanisms in place that would allow workers to initiate complaints and enforcement actions. Another thing that the Trade Act does is it protects working people in developing countries from the agricultural dumping that has forced millions of small farmers off their land, creating all sorts of rural poverty and increased migration, forced migration. The Trade Act also recognizes the rights of both large and small countries to develop and purchase their own generic medications for their people. It allows governments to set procurement policies that favor prevailing wages, that favor buy local preferences, that favor environmental and social responsibility criteria. The Trade Act prevents trade pacts from being used, the service sectors that we heard about, from being used to force privatization and deregulation. It does that very explicitly. It also stops these investor-to-state lawsuits that allow foreign corporations to challenge U.S. laws in a process that completely circumvents the U.S. court system. And so the Trade Act does a lot of other things, but one of the other things it does is it opens up the entire policy-making process for more public input and more public oversight. And so in short, the Trade Act is the death knell for NAFTA-style trade agreements. When this passes, there'll be no more NAFTAs, there'll be no more CAFTAs, there'll be no more free trade with dictatorships. What there'll be instead is the space we need to figure out trading partnerships and trading relationships that actually improve quality of life and living standards for working people in this country and around the world. And so that's a very big change from what we have right now. And it's not only a big change, it's a necessary change. If we want Americans to have access to good jobs, if we want to make sure that our wages and our benefits are increasing over time, if we want the American dollar to stabilize and prevent inflation from running rampant, we need to change our trade policy. And the past 15 years of job loss, of wage stagnation, of inaction on global warming, of inaction on health care, of increasing international animosity, all these things have taught us that free markets are no way to organize an economy or run a government. This financial crisis, it puts an exclamation point on what a generation of experience has already taught us. We've known this. And we need real change. The Trade Act is a tool for getting us there. And we're going to hear from a few speakers tonight who have very grim news for us about what free trade agreements have meant to this country, what they've meant to this city. And we know this. It's important that we remind ourselves of this because there is a lot at stake. We have a choice of how we react to this information. We can bunker down and insulate ourselves and try to just survive as individuals,